Thanks for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford.
And I'm Nick Lozano.
Today we've got a special guest with us, Ryan Deeds, who is going to tell us a little bit about himself as we embark on a discussion around data, technology, and leadership. Ryan, thanks for joining us. Why don't you take a minute and kind of walk us through who you are and some of your background?
Deep existential questions. I dig that.
That's what we shoot for here.
That's right. I'm Ryan Deeds. I'm the VP of Data and Technology at Assurex Global. What that really means is we're trying to find that out, actually. But I spend a lot of time helping CIOs and CEOs figure out data, create data strategy, try to understand how they drive decisions and behaviors with data, and how do they use it as a communication mechanism. I've been in the kind of data and analytics space for 15, 16 years. I use SQL and Python as my primary tools, and I'm very good on the Microsoft. I know Microsoft BI stack fairly well. So.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I know that you've had a number of different roles in your career that have been leadership oriented. Talk a little bit about, what brought you up through the ranks, and ultimately, how has that continued to drive your passion of both technology as well as data?
It's funny when you talk about leadership. I think it's so much more than a title. I've seen CEOs that cannot rally a flag and drive behavior forward, and then I've seen a receptionist that has the heart and mind of everybody in the office. And so from my perspective, I've always followed the kind of servant leader motive, and I've always really tried to dig deep into the emotionality of the folks that I work with, so they understand that I'm sincere and that I believe in them, and I want to understand what drives them to be where they are, and then how do we help them move forward. I think one of the core things in anybody who's considered a leader, and I'm very remiss to consider myself a leader. I like to think that I'm one opinion in many, and sometimes people's opinions coincide with mine, and then maybe we can do stuff together. I just feel like today leadership is not about the person that stands the tallest. It's the person who communicates the most effectively and the most sincerely, and can help understand where we are today and where we're trying to go in a communication style. And then I've used data to underpin that in a lot of cases by showing employees where they stand today, where the corporation is headed, and what role do they play in the overall growth of that organization. And because when I think of data as a employee engagement mechanism almost more than anything else. When you think about the core goal of data, it's to help distill down what each member's contribution to the greater good is. And if you can help them quantify that and quantify the behaviors that drive that, they will aspire to that. I think that the vast majority of our employees try to do the best they can, and the better guidance that we can provide them, the better they'll do. And then somebody will say, "Oh, you're a leader." You're like, I don't know about that.
Well, that's an awesome backgrounder, and really appreciate your perspective on that. I resonate with a lot of the things that you mentioned there. In particular, the idea that leadership is an activity versus a title or a role. The communication aspect of it, I think, is also critical. Similarly, I have worked with a number of leaders over the years who may be exceptional at setting a strategic plan, but communicating that, really getting the buy-in and the consensus from those who need to follow, that has not always been a core strength of every leader that I've worked with. So that communication element is one of those I would rank it sort of as a high EQ, high adaptive type of skill set that it certainly can be trained, but there are some people who are, I think, more naturally skilled in that area than others. And if
For
they don't,
for me, it's therapy, man. I went through therapy for like 20 years as a kid. And so, like, I swear that's like, if my parents did anything, it was they sent me to a lot of therapy as a child, And so, because I think we're seeing this new movement. It's this authority-less leadership where it's not leadership based on how much authority you present, but how much consensus you can build and make each individual understand why we're driving that way and what's in it for them. And then how do they move that way? And, I think those are the leaders that I want to work with too. If somebody has to, the folks that understand how to really get at your heart and soul, and the best ones that I've worked with absolutely do that. You always feel like, yeah, that person's in my corner. That's how I know it's a good leader, right?
oh yeah,
And you are the second guest of ours to say that you are a servant leader. So I mean, that seems like that's a going trend here, right, Brian? I believe Jensen Hendricks, who was our guest about SEO, he said he was a servant leader as well. And I know, what do you say? That Jocko was a huge influence on him. The whole dichotomy of leadership, the extreme ownership thing. So it's pretty interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an avid reader, and I think that you pick up nuggets from these books. And there's this book called The Fifth Discipline that talked about the unforeseen consequences of a decision that is made and how we lose the ability to track back root cause because we deal with the ripple effects of those decisions. And I think, when I look at how we make decisions today in leadership roles, ever since I've read that book, man, I'm always like trying to understand what problems am I going to cause by this. Yeah, I mean, because you may solve one problem, but you may create five others, and so,
yeah.
and I think as you build consensus and as people can understand your motivation, and then I preach judge on intent, not execution. Execution always gets screwed up. You didn't mean to yell at that employee. You didn't mean to have a bad day, but so I'm always trying to coach my people and myself to judge folks on intent instead of execution, because obviously I've failed oftentimes at execution. And so I think those are kind of core things. And then self-deprecation. To me, you got to be able to understand your weaknesses and your flaws and really drill into that. And make fun of it.
Absolutely. Certainly having that ability to have self-reflection as well as the self-deprecation, that's another key trait that, some of us are better than others at being able to look in the mirror and read it for what it is. Those ripple effects that come from decision making, again, that is something that I think comes with that higher EQ, that higher sense of holistic awareness. And that is also, to me, one of those really key leadership characteristics. And it's refreshing to hear someone, reference a book like you did that has that sort of orientation. Because honestly, particularly when you're dealing with the type of work environments that we do, where technology has an increasing role in every industry that you can imagine, and there's greater and greater complexity that comes along with it. There are downstream impacts that are potential with any decision that is made, and to not have that holistic mindset as a key driver through that decision-making process, I've seen come back to haunt many different functional leaders who may think from beginning to end in their little domain, but they don't think of all of the other potential ramifications that making changes and decisions can ultimately have within their environment.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's so weird because we have these tech leaders, and I'd absolutely say, I'm a tech leader, but there's been a transition from technological strategic vision to, oh, now the corporation's kind of setting a strategy based on what you hope to bring, or the scale that you hope to attain, or profitability is tied back to utilization. I mean, we have been thrust into this limelight now, and I was lucky because early on, firms put me in their executive leadership teams extremely early. And I think I was 27 when I first started being in executive leadership meetings. And so oftentimes I get CEOs that ask, like, hey, how do we go find an IT person like you, that understands the business? And I'm like, that person's probably sitting in your closet, but maybe you never offered that role. Maybe you never trained that person up. Maybe that person never thought to that they'd be accepted. And so it takes two. It takes an IT professional that wants to grow, and then it takes an organization that's willing to help that person. And I'm sitting through 16 years of freaking executive leadership meetings has really changed the way that I can perceive technology and business problems and the whole nine. And so had I not been with those firms that were progressive, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't be whatever I am today. And so I've just been thankful and lucky that I landed where I did. And then I tried to maximize those opportunities as I could. And sometimes I failed and sometimes I did okay.
I want to touch on something that you just mentioned there, Ryan. So I think having a culture of inquisitiveness is another, core trait to really having that path to discovery with some of your hidden talent, in your current workforce. Questions don't always get asked. And, I think a lot of times folks tend to think of themselves in a very dynamic way, but others that they may work with in this very static, it's you are whoever you were when you started at the organization, tends to be the mindset that settles for a lot of folks. And that can, back to the communication, that can diminish really mining for that hidden talent within your workforce. If you don't take the time to ask the questions or really have all of that orientation around what a career development path can look like.
Well, and I think it's changing so drastically today because everybody wants an innovation unit, right? Like that's like the thing. Like everybody's all about it. We need an innovation unit. And really, they have had an innovation unit for as long as they've been in business because their staff understands what they hate to do. And they've probably figured out ways to do it better, but the agency or the organization probably hasn't listened. And so once you don't listen 2 or 3 times, you stop getting people to submit requests. And if you do listen and you don't act on it, it's not going to happen, And so I think that absolutely, if the leader of an organization figures out a path to out the end user's pain points, they will have an unending list of things to innovate over. And as soon as they start to deliver on that, and you hold somebody up and you say, hey, this person created this solution and this is the result, and it's all them. All we did was help enable that vision to come true. Everybody's hand goes up. And in a year, everybody's like, wow, you're the most innovative company we've ever seen. And you're just kind of sitting back like, I'm just solving their problems,
And so how much of that is mentoring the current staff you have currently, kind of allowing them to take on projects or different roles that they haven't done before and kind of allowing them to fail?
Man, I mean, it's huge because it really, you can't approach, it's very difficult to do that top down because to get top down buy-in in that is very hard. So what I did was, just as the kind of technologist I am, I always tell my guys, you're going to be around those desks. I don't care if they need help or not, because I don't want them to equate you with problems. So 2 or 3 times a day, you need to walk around the floor. You need to talk to people, talk about Mary's dog and Betty's cat and Bob's freaking son. Get human with them, build trust, because as you do that, we stop getting equated with being the only time we ever show up is when there's an issue. And if they'll allow us to sit with them for a little while, and if you sit with somebody for 5 hours and you start watching how they work and what they're fumbling with, they don't even know they're fumbling with it, right? But they're just struggling with it. Well, you can come back and say, hey, man, what if we did this? What if we try this? And a lot of times they're very receptive because it's affecting just them. And so typically how I would approach it is always go to the account the kind of the lowest rung on the totem pole, the ones that are doing the most numerous amount of work, figure out what they hated to do. I would build small projects that would show, hey, this might work for you. If they bought in and they could get 5 of their peers to use it, we would then start iterating through that. Well, once we did that 2 or 3 times, now, I mean, that's when our innovative culture kind of was born. And we could go to the CEO at that point and say, this is what we're doing. This is what innovation looks like. This is really the future, because you're creating employee engagement, employee empowerment. You're taking the stuff they hate away to do, and you're getting more efficient. And so it's a win-win across the board. And it's really about building trust, though. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's taking an idea that you know that you can do quickly, providing some small POC on that, giving it back to them. And sometimes it would be in a day. Like I'd have a problem on a Monday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, I was like, here's a very brief solution. What do you think? Use it and let's take a look at it. And that kind of speed of action changes the way that the corporation functions.
I don't know of many organizations that work as nimbly as what you just described, but I do appreciate that is, in terms of delivering effectiveness, that's really a critical skill set to develop if it's not something that's already in your wheelhouse as a leader.
No, absolutely. I mean, but I think it's all about, like you said, it's almost about worldview. How open to new are you as an individual, and how set in your truth are you? I mean, my whole reality can shift tomorrow, and really, my best nights ever come from discussions where my truth is challenged, and maybe I learned something new. Right? Like maybe I come away from this communication a different person. My perception's been shifted. I live for those moments. And, because I think that it's growth. It's growth in who we are as individuals. And so when you see leaders that are very locked into their myopic worldview, regardless of what it is, they're at a disadvantage. And so, I think that openness to new is a huge, huge thing you look for in progressive leaders.
And I think you also, kind of touched on that when you were talking about if you're just solving some of the core issues of your workforce, then that's ultimately, what's driving that innovative change. Some of those things are not exclusive to whatever's being a challenge on the internal side. Some of this starts to factor out into more of those client-facing innovations that are really trying to solve some of the bottlenecks from whoever's working at the desk and whoever they're serving on the client end.
I mean,
Would you agree with that?
All day. I mean, think about this. This is the best project I probably ever had. I mean, the one that I feel like changed our organization fundamentally when I was at Crichton was as this account manager named Brian said, hey, there's got to be a better way to get builders risk data. He told me that late on like a Tuesday night. I had no awareness that he was struggling with that. So I went home and I was like, data collection, Googled it, and up came a thing called FormSite. Well, I was like, okay, cool. He sent me the PDF. I went ahead and created the fields in FormSite. I mapped the answers back to the PDF, and I sent it to him the next morning. And I was like, oh, what about this? And he was like dumbfounded. He was just blown away by it. And within like 3 months, man, we had 200 forms created. We had clients using them on their own intranets because we would create like incident tracking stuff. And so you see this like evolution, and then they started to understand what was possible. And I think if you can bring like a Zapier knowledge into your organization, they're going to understand that there is no problem that's unsolvable. It's just, how do we work the process to make that problem be better, be more effective? Too often right now, people are just like, oh yeah, there's no solution to this. And so my whole goal was not so much specific technologies. That has a limited ramification. Moreover, I want to open your eyes to the possibilities of the world by showing you use cases for these different things. And then I want you to leverage your creativity to solve problems without me. Because that's the leader. right? To be able to pass that on, that's where you get the impact.
Oh,
I
sure.
completely agree with you. And I know Brian have had this conversation before that innovation doesn't necessarily mean technology. When people think innovation nowadays, they're like, okay, what cool technology is Google or Apple or Amazon going to do? When innovation on a small scale could just be a business process or a use case.
It's
Maybe
totally simple.
your end user, your customer is suffering from something, and you can solve it very easily just by making an easier business process.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think innovation is subjective. And I think that's a problem because I think a CEO of a, $30 million firm looks at Elon Musk and says, wow, that's innovative, but he can't get electronic forms filled out.
Yep.
And so from my perspective, innovation it is a very specific to company kind of thing. And there's an innovational maturity that will come with it. But the main thing about that is prompting individuals to be able to out their ideas on solutions and to be able to articulate problems effectively. And those can be, very big programs, or they can be, just kind of agile processes, that you have. But no, I actually give a presentation that talks about don't look outward for innovation. Look inward for problems. I mean, and I use this term all the time, but I make my managers have the list of the top 5 soul-sucking tasks that they have, because that's innovation. If you can then look across the board and see all the different problems that you have, and identify one that might have a systemic effect, and you solve that, well, dang, now you're innovative. Right. I mean, you do that 2 or 3 times. And you didn't have to come up with an app or an iPhone or use blockchain,
What do you mean blockchain won't solve all our problems of the world?
No, man. I think it's so funny. Blockchain is just funny to me, man.
You and me both. I'm not going to touch that.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, let's pivot and go a little deeper on the data side. So, I know initially we had talked about, really just touching on what are the top 3 foundational things related to having an understanding of data that's going to be critical to leaders at all levels, not just technology leaders, but when you're working with other leadership, trying to help them understand what are those foundational data elements that are critical to your business and can help drive, maybe in this case, some innovation. What are those foundational pieces to your mind?
I mean, first and foremost, I think we have to come to a consensus of what we hope to deliver with data, because from my perspective, it is communication. That's when you're leveraging data as a communication mechanism for something. And once they understand that, and they've experienced it. I mean, they've gone to a dashboard, they've looked at things, they've been communicated to via data, but I don't think they conceptualize it in the same way, And so that's kind of the first thing is like, we're using data to communicate. As we look through what we want to communicate, that's going to drive what we need to get out of our data, And then I try to bring, a foundational understanding of the elements that tie back to those communication pieces. If you have kind of a swaggy number that doesn't work in there that you need to true up, and that's something they're leveraging all the time, or if you have a look back number that they're trying to use in real time, trying to understand the nuances of the data elements that match up with what they're trying to communicate is important, because once that's done, then it's all about data correctness. How do we audit that effectively against, normal limits? What does a data management strategy look like? How do we have the accountability in place to drive, real-time audits of that information back to the end user? And I try to set an expectation of the time. Like, this is not an easy button kind of thing. This is a maybe 18-month process that's going to, that at that 18th month is when it really will start. You may be able to start netting some gain out of that, but the more planning that you put on the front end, discussing the data elements, what they mean, what they're driven to communicate, how they're audited, how they're, what ties back, and what are we missing from that? That's where my discussions are always based. The unfortunate part, their discussions always want to be on what tool should I use to show the data. Right.
I completely agree with you, and that's the wrong conversation to have.
It drives me, and it really does.
Yeah.
Like, I get a call like, "Hey, we're looking at Domo." I'm like, "What? Well, okay. What are you trying
You mean
to
that
do?"
little 7-Eleven monster that eats everything?
I mean, you know, I'm just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I mean, what's the difference? So yeah, just right. But
Yeah.
the vendors don't do us any favors because the vendors pitch, "Hey, put our solution in place. You're going to see the data, and everything's going to work." And it's just not that way.
Yeah, no one is selling an 18-month timeline of boring soldiering work to get to a starting point. And that is a key challenge from the communication perspective of being in a leadership role where you're trying to convey that message back to the business. That can be an incredibly hard sell. So help walk us through what is an iterative approach so that you can have some milestones along the way so that you're celebrating successes. It feels like there's progress and it's not just like, a year and a half slog to get to effectiveness.
So it's funny because I actually have a timeline as I've been helping some of my companies because their expectations are, "Hey, we went out and bought this product, we did this thing, and now why isn't our revenue increasing?" It's like, hold on. I mean, you guys are just starting. And so, and I told them, I was like, well, maybe I didn't set the expectation correctly for you, but I think that it's different for each organization because it depends on where they are. But I think for me, step one is to almost identify we're not using data at all. We may think we are, but we are actually not using it strategically. We don't leverage. We use it for reports, but we don't use it as a focus mechanism to get everybody rowing in the same direction and to be able to identify key areas of that we could improve on in whatever context that is. And I mean, that is a very big wake up call to have that kind of discussion for a firm to realize that, and it doesn't come easy because oftentimes they're using reports and they'll tell you, no, our data is good. Then my question is always, well, how long does it take you to generate a report? Because typically if they say, well, it'll take 4 days. Well, 4 days is a lot of human intuition that goes into that report that's doing all the data correcting, right? And so I can kind of drive back to that and say, look, the reason your automated stuff doesn't work and your human report does is because you don't have the intuition of the human that's doing the massaging in the tool that you're doing the visualizing in. So, and if it's a 4 or 5 day thing, there's a ton of work to do because there's a lot of massaging going on that's locked into a human's brain and we have to change processes. But I think that is kind of the first step of understanding, okay, so we're not using data. And that's going to come in with each individual firm's timeline. Then I think the next one is, we want to start using data, right? Like, okay, now we recognize we're not using it, and we think that there is some form of we know we can do better with it, and we want to do it. And I think that's where a lot of firms are right now, and that's where they get lost. I mean, because everybody offers kind of easy solution. They want to solve a problem. They bring it in and they get burned by it. And they're like, oh my God, this is terrible. I mean, that's why I think, between 2002 and 2010, you just had BI project after BI project fail over and over again. And it was because they kept just laying tools on top of crappy data. The expectation wasn't set effectively. And now they're a little more sophisticated, and I do see them being more reticent to just buy product. I get a lot of calls on it still, but they're way more willing to say, "Look, don't do it. Use Excel. Let's do data validation verification first." Then the next step is, once we identify that we want to start using data, then it's like, what problems can we solve with that data? And as we look at it, are there some big problems that we could solve? Are there small problems? How do we want to bucket that out? What do we think we want to leverage that for? And I think that's another critical piece because so often people just think data is the magic thing. Like, once I get data, all my problems will be resolved. And when I came into Assurex, that was what all the firms said is, hey, we want data. We want Assurex to do a data project, something like that. And it made me real scared because what they see as a data project and what I visualize as a data project and what you can actually bring to fruition with multiple firms is very different and difficult. And so, um, you know, trying to explain that to them was an interesting process. Then once you can identify some of the problems that you have with data, now it's like, what data do we actually have access to? What can we actually use in our system? Can we identify elements that we want to use? And that's kind of the way I see it is you'd have your problem at the top, and then in a line you'd kind of write out what your data elements that you are going to leverage. Hey, this is the transaction date of the transaction. This is when it happened. This is the amount. This is who the salesperson was. um what Those are the elements. So if you're doing a new sales report and you want to automate your sales report, then you would obviously have to go through and identify, where are we capturing that data today, and are we doing it effectively? Right? Do we have that? The next, I mean, and it's about a 13-step process as I see it. I mean, and so for me, if you start this, you're right now, you're like the 8th month, maybe. If you're doing, and you might be experimenting with things and doing different stuff, because now it's time to figure out, how do we get to that data? If it's not being filled out correctly, how do we get it filled out correctly? Do we have to backfill that data? But a lot of this discovery will take you through those questions and those processes.
It's almost like a cyclical process too, right? Once you hit that, you gotta iterate and go right back again too, and make sure that you're not being led down a false road.
Well, and what I've always found with analytics is there is no end. Everybody wants to get more and more granular. They want more and more information as they start to be able to visualize stuff. I've never got more questions than when I first show something, right? Because like, you show a visualization that you've been working on for maybe 3 months, and it's totally apparent what it says, and you put it up there. Now they want to challenge everything, which is fine, because if you've built it correctly, you can validate those answers pretty rapidly. But like, when I came into Crichton, I was a 2-year data strategy. I had a 2-year just to get a baseline benchmark of data. And that's what I saw. I mean, when I interviewed with them, I had a 5-year strategy with them. But I mean, 2 of that was to get good quality data, identify what that was, what we were going to use it for, all the business rules that coincided with it. And that's a lot more work than anything else. I mean, because, and like, I think, like you'd said, start small. Start with the smallest problem you can find, get your process of iteration down, and then you can tackle more problems as you move forward.
And how much of that is just end user education? I know when I've deployed, any type of data analytics or visualization tool, sometimes there comes a process where you kind of have to educate people how to read statistical, graphs and different charts, because sometimes they don't understand just even how to read, the chart that you might have put together in a Tableau.
Well, I mean, so for me, and again, I've been building role-based dashboards for users since 2005. So, I mean, I've a bit of experience trying to get my end user to buy in. And so what I've done is I do stories. Typically for my users, if they're a sales role or a service role, I'll say, this is where you were on January 1. This is where you are today. These are the new clients that you have. These are the clients that you lost. These are the clients that got moved out. These are the clients that got moved in. You represent 22% of the agency overall in client count. You push 3% of the overall revenue. Your growth needs to be 8% this year. It's 5% right now. And so if you align it in a story, it's so much more palatable to me. Obviously CFO reports, because my visualizations are very, very user specific. Who's viewing this, and the thing I show a CFO, I would never show a CEO. The CFO report is detailed, granular. It's going to get into everything. CEO is going to be a topical, pretty broad, easy to understand visualization that says, hey, you're doing good or you're doing bad. But for the users, for the most part, like once Power BI came out, man, they grabbed onto that stuff so hard. But our analytics were deeply aligned with the problem sets that they had, and so I think when that's the case as well, you have a lot less adoption issues.
Mhm.
That data literacy is a component of what I'm hearing here. So, the first piece, Nick, to your point, I think is it's not just a matter of explanation. It's really fundamentally changing the understanding at every level of the organization so that that data literacy is actually a component of how people are receiving and apprehending the information that you're providing to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I do not think that any data project will work effectively unless you have real-time audits shown back to the people that enter the data. Just won't work. So in my dashboards, they would always have 16 or 17 audits, and I mean sometimes they would request them, and whenever data that fell outside of normal limits was hit, then they would have an indicator that they needed to go in and fix that problem, which ultimately trained them to not replicate the issue much quicker than a end of the month exception report. And so the dashboard strategies today hardly ever do that. And I think it's the most critical thing, because if you say that sales revenue is the number that has to be plugged in all the time. Well, if you have an audit that says, hey, look, you've got 8 of these that are not filled in, and in 3 days, if you don't resolve this, it's going to go to your manager, but if you take care of them, nobody will know. And if you take care of them in a timely manner for the next 6 months, you'll get a free PTO day. Well, now you ain't gonna have no problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's how the data strategies that I've put in place have always been. It always starts with root elements that are audited and then shown back to the user that enters it. And over time, you see the error rate drastically decrease because they learn, because they don't want to screw up. I mean, they want to do it if they have something that helps them. And then they ultimately like a ton of different audits push to that because they feel like it's a secondary set of eyes over their shoulder that helps them move forward.
You just touched on two of the behavioral characteristics that I've been writing about in terms of what type of finisher are you? It's this latest post that I've been developing, and what you were just talking about there hits both of those sort of elements of the psychological profile, right? Some people are driven by a reward structure, so getting the PTO day. Others are driven by avoidance, right? It's whatever it is, I just don't want X to happen. And
Right.
in this case, it's now this report's going to go to my manager if I don't get this stuff. So I love how you're able to identify getting both of those psychological components baked into what your approach is. I think it's ingenious.
Well, and I think the other key part was the folks on our teams always would know that the data that was shown on the dashboards was what they were being judged on, right? Like it wasn't the sole component, but it was a key component when we'd look at who's holding what water, who's carrying what weight, and once they understood that, if they had hey, if I have $800,000 of service business this year. Man, it would be awesome if I get to 900,000. And you're showing them that in real time pretty much. And so, it's not like think about a non-dashboard agency or group that loses a client and you don't reflect that back every day and say, hey, you've lost 18 clients this year. That's 14% higher than last year. Is there something that we should be aware of? What's going on? Are you just having a bad run of luck? I mean, that kind of stuff communicates where you need them to be. And because you're also showing new business. So, I mean, again, it's not a judgment, but it is an absolute reflection of reality of where they need to be. And if they trust that you're going to leverage that to create incentive programs, they are all over it, man. I mean, we did lose quite a few people. I think we lost 10 people that quit over time after we brought the analytics in because the transparency that it provides is just ridiculous. But the lions in an agency loved it, and that's who you want.
And getting that command of understanding, I think, goes back again to now it's something that is this interactive layer within your business, right? It's not just give me a report. All of those things that you just referenced. Now there's that data literacy is driving the interaction with it, where it's seen as this is a component of how we do business. This is a component of how we make decisions. And once you've got that kind of fundamental understanding, in my experience, that's where you can make the transition into helping everyone fundamentally realize that this is just part of how we run business today. This is not a project that has a finish. This is a continuous cycle for us where it's ever evolving and improving.
Oh. And after a little while, you don't have to, because they just do it. I mean, the Gen Z folks, the millennials, these guys are actually pretty data literate because they've used metrics every day. How many likes do I have versus this person? I mean, my kid, my 6-year-old knows YouTube likes, subscription rates. I mean,
yeah, they do.
It's data everywhere, and so I think it's going to be up to the companies to try to leverage that kind of behavior going forward. I think that data literacy is not going to be a hard thing if we can illustrate things. This is bad. This is a good. This equates to a like in your business. This equates to a not like, thumbs down. And so, I mean, I think it's a really interesting time for analytics, because we do have so many people that are so used to leveraging all kinds of analytics on social media.
And I agree with you completely there. The next generation coming up, like you said, your 6-year-old, I've seen, that they all want to have YouTube channels where they unbox toys. And this is like evidently some big craze that like every, 6-year-old wants to do, because they're making tons of money. So they're already way ahead of, some of the previous generations, because they're already, talking about exposure rates and like counts and impressions. And it's just so much more advanced. I feel like you just kind of need to start somewhere now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, man. Like we do goals every year for the family, and we sit down and we review the goals from the last year, and we put our goals forward for the new year. And so this year, Tori, my 6-year-old, she's like, my goal at the end of the year is to have 100 followers on YouTube, because she likes to stream.
Yeah.
She's a video game like nut, bro. I mean, she just plays just a ton of video games. And so we'll sit next to each other for hours, and she will stream this stuff, and she'll be looking at the viewer analytics as it moves forward. So I have no idea what that does to these kids, because she can learn so that's the biggest difference here, is they can learn so dang quick, man. I mean, my kid asked me a question about Roblox. I'm like, I don't know. And 3 minutes later, she's on YouTube looking up that answer.
Right.
When I was a kid, if my dad was like, hey, I don't know why the sky is blue. All right, cool. I'm going to go play in the mud.
Yeah. It's that difference between being, a digital native and a digital nomad. They're kind of digital natives.
I mean, it's crazy. There's so many experience, and it's interesting because I have a 16 or a 17-year-old now and a 6-year-old, and there's a gigantic gap between their technical ability. I mean, my 17-year-old's more technical because she's older, but Tori's going to be a damn nightmare, man. I mean, it's going to be crazy, because like the stuff that she does, like I asked her to spell something. She had a spelling quiz, and I was like, spell tomorrow. And she was like, Siri, how do you spell tomorrow? Like, no.
Right. Well, that's what Ray Kurzweil has written about, is the singularity, right? It's at that point that we are fast approaching where human augmentation with technology it's just going to be a given. It's part of how all of us will interact everywhere, right?
I am such a huge augmented reality fan, man. I mean, and so I picked up a Magic Leap glasses dev kit. I've been playing with Unity some with it, because I see in the corporate world just a ton of utilization for that. And so, yes, I totally agree that, ultimately we will have a HUD that we're using to navigate life. And we've seen different executions of that fail. But when you look at the cars today, and how valuable that information is being right there in front of you, that's coming. It's going to be here. And so I don't know if you just saw where Snapchat put out their new like augmented reality kind of kit for business. And I mean, I think that this stuff is going to be wild. So yeah, I definitely believe that by the time that Tori's, 20, she'll be all up in that thing, man. It's going to be nuts.
I think we probably still need to define Snapchat for some of the folks that I work with who are in executive leadership. I'm not sure they even know how it works.
Well, if they don't, they should for sure, right? So,
well, I think all the kids are on TikTok now. So,
dude. So, and it's so scary. Like TikTok just scares the hell out of me, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on it because I like to experiment with new technology, but man, it is a scary, scary place.
Well, define that a little bit. I have my own understanding of why I think it's scary, but I want to hear
Well,
your opinion
anything
on it.
that brings old men and young, scantily clad women together is scary.
Yeah,
I mean, it's rife. It's rife for abuse. It permeates this show culture for women. I think the more I show, the more views I have, the more scantily clad. So it pushes the sexualization of women that drives me nuts. And maybe it's because I'm a parent of 2 girls, but I mean, it's something I struggle with heavily, and I see it all over the place. And on TikTok, it's like it's the purest form of that you can see today, because it's totally driven by, in my opinion, a lot of this youthful kind of sexuality that's happening, and it sucks. There's some real cool artists on there. There's some people that I follow, but it is something that drives that behavior, and then that has older men on there. As a father of young women that are on that platform, it's something that makes me nervous.
I don't know where to go next with that.
Let's talk about chat roulette. You guys remember that? No. To me, TikTok's just another iteration of that, but it's on an app. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you scroll through TikTok at all, obviously and you try to categorize in data what you see,
no, and Instagram's kind of the same way too. When you look at everything that's super popular, it is all the things, the guys with 6-packs and the
That's right.
scantily clad, ladies and everything, and it's kind of going that way too.
Yeah, and it's funny because I never really got into IG. I've almost totally pulled off of Facebook, from a personal standpoint. LinkedIn is like the only social network that I use now, and I'm on TikTok a little bit. And then when anything pops up, I get it for a little while just to play with it.
Well, I know that you referenced an influential book earlier on in our conversation, but I'm kind of curious: is there another book that has been a difference maker for you as you've come up to the ranks as a leader in technology?
That just sounds wrong. It doesn't resonate with me. But yes, I think that
it could be a Kindle book.
The best book I've ever, like the one that I've probably taken the most away from, was Good to Great. And it's cliche, and everybody's read it. But I mean, damn, every time I read that book, you can take something else away from it. I believe in the core competency theory. There's so much about that book that I feel was accurate, and I love the data that they leveraged when they did the comparatives between those places. Then I also thought it was interesting, as you read it, and some of those places fall out from other competitors, to be able to look at that, and so I love that. I love Malcolm Gladwell stuff. I'm a historical nut, and so I think there's a ton of business stuff that you can learn from history, just because of the strategies that are involved. And so, but Good to Great was probably the most influential.
That's great. Thank you. Nick, what else you got for us?
I don't know. You stole my question, Ryan. So.
Well, I'm sensitive to time. I know that you said you needed to scoot here about now, Ryan. So I didn't want to keep dragging us on.
No worries, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a little wide ranging, but that's always how it kind of goes with me. So
that's what we were looking for, and you delivered.
There you go. It's all over the map, brother.
That's right.
So, Ryan, if people are looking for you on social media, or I know you said you're on LinkedIn, so where can they find you?
Ryan Deeds on LinkedIn. That's the easiest. They'll find me, and I will answer them if they want to talk, for the most part.
and you do have your own podcast as well, called The Digital Broker? I
do. I have a podcast called The Digital Broker, where we talk about insurance agency operations stuff, and it's odd because I never thought that there would be multiple podcasts about insurance agencies ever, and now there's a bunch of them, and so it's kind of a fun time. And I have a pretty good group of followers that I dig, and I don't know what'll happen with that, but it's been fun, and we're about to hit our year anniversary, and so it's cool stuff. It gets released on Tuesdays every morning at 8 or something.
No, it's been cool to see your podcast grow, and I've seen on LinkedIn, it's like, oh, finally meeting Ryan Deeds from The Digital Broker. So it's been cool to see you guys grow that over the past year.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's great content as well. So thank you for all you've delivered with that.
I try, guys. Well, I appreciate it, and I am. I've got to run and go get my kitties. So you guys have a good afternoon.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ryan.